Hello everyone and welcome to the Kootneeti's YouTube channel. I am Niranjan Marjani. Our guest today is Dr. Duygu Çağla Bayram. She is an Ankara-based independent researcher. Her academic interests focus on the Indo-Pacific region and India. She completed her PhD in International Relations in December 2020 in Turkey, with her thesis focusing on debates on the Indo-Pacific concept in 21st century Indian foreign policy. She is the author of a book titled New Course in Turbulent Waters, the Indo-Pacific Narrative and India, which was published in Turkish in July 2021. She has lived and worked in UK, Europe and Russia. She analyzes developments in the Indo-Pacific region and India and also contributes commentaries to various national and international media outlets. Dr. Çağla Bayram, welcome to the Kootneeti. It's a pleasure to have you on our show.
Thank you very much.
I would like to start by asking how you developed interest in studying India.
Actually, I have also mentioned a little about this on the preface of my book. I have always had a sympathy to India deep down. And it may sound funny, but even the times I had no basic knowledge about the country, like where is the capital of. But to be honest, I have no specific reason for my interest, and this sympathy has first concreted in my doctoral process by academic studies, also mediatic activities. So that is for the last 5 years. I can certainly count a general thing that it was a strategic choice, as India has been gaining currency in world politics. And as I predicted, there was going to be a huge curiosity about India and a need of Indian knowledge in Turkey as well as all across the world countries. And now I can safely say that my strategy just came true, and we are talking about India as well, along with some others.
Your book, New Course in Turbulent Waters, the Indo-Pacific Narrative and India, was published recently. So could you tell us something about this book?
Sure. Let me have a longer answer for that. First of all, I would like to begin with stating that my book, as you said, if we translate the title of it from Turkish to English, as can be New Course in Turbulent Waters, the Indo-Pacific Narrative and India, but it's written in Turkish on purpose. I believe in that the book marks the first comprehensive reference or source in Turkish international relations literature, in which the concept of Indo-Pacific or the conceptualization of Indo-Pacific and India, basically Indian foreign policy, are explained and analyzed. And the most important thing is that it develops some new concepts on India's foreign policy or state behaviors. So it's important to be written in Turkish. And as you know, Indo-Pacific concept is the old one in biogeographic field. But the Indo-Pacific construct is so fresh when we think about the world politics, or it's so new as geopolitics. So it's quite normal. The national literatures of each country have been slowly developing for the last 10 or 14 years. When we think about English literature. But about Turkish one, we can count this process for a last couple of years, maybe a maximum 2 or 3 years. Let me say, thanks to me. So I can confidently say that when it's about India, we have very valuable historical studies about India. But in the framework of foreign policy or international relations, we still need a long way to go. So I see this book is very important, being in Turkish, very valuable, but also for Indian audience, for English speakers, but particularly Indian audience, I was planning to publish an English summary of my book as a journal article in India. Unfortunately, the article couldn't be written yet, but it may come true within the next month. But an English book chapter that briefly covers the subject of a small part of that book will be coming out in September in the United Kingdom. So it may reflect at least editor of the book's perspective or the main theme for English speakers, but like I said, most important, the Indian audience. And from here, if we talk about the content details, I developed my book with 3 comprehensive chapters. And the first one explains Indo-Pacific in conceptual, process, and theoretical perspectives. And in addition, it underlines the importance of India in this conceptualization with the perspective of mostly India's geographical and geopolitical location in the Indian Ocean. And the second chapter that begins with China factor, as we all know, and the strategic triangle that refers to United States, China, and India, tells us the Indo-Pacific geopolitics or strategies or intents of the 4 main actors, which also signify the Quad nations. And specifically India-focused the third last chapter, is the very comprehensive one and analyzes India's bilateral relations with China, the United States, Japan, and Australia, and also analyzes Indian foreign policy from the past to the present, and gives more information about its bilateral relations with Russia as well. And what's more, the last chapter also analyzes the Indian local debates of the Indo-Pacific concept in India's academic, mediatic, and political communities. And by the way, the book includes very valuable perspectives, opinions, thanks to some interviews with some valuable names. And I also wish to special thanks them from here. First of all, it's Mr. Hüseyin Bağcı, Professor of International Relations at Middle East Technical University in Ankara and President of Foreign Policy Institute. And also you may know Mr. Burak Akçapar, who is an associate professor and who was an ambassador to India the time between 2009 and 2016, I think. And he was also Director General for Policy Planning at the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Policy. And he is also currently ambassador to Spain. So I seriously thank them for their ideological contributions and encouragements for this book, as well as for my general India studies. But also, I seriously want to thank the Dr. Gurpreet Singh Khurana, the captain in Indian Navy, yeah, and Professor Shrikant Kondopalli as well from Nehru University. Also, Professor Chilamkuri Rajamohan from National University of Singapore. I seriously want to thank them for the very valuable interviews for this book. And as a last word, I would like to say one more thing as well. I have had some attempts to be able to one more valuable interview with Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, but I couldn't make of it. I couldn't get any response from him or his officials.
Okay, that's interesting. And because when we talk about India in the context of Indo-Pacific region, then historically India has been a maritime nation, but over centuries and especially during the British colonial period, it developed a continental outlook and it continued even after the independence. So how much has proximity to United States contributed to India revisiting the maritime orientation? And where do you see India's policy of not entering into strategic alliances fit into this?
I think India is a maritime nation as well as a continental. The other words, we may say that India is actually both, as it needs to focus on not only its continental borders, but also its maritime borders. But yes, India has been focusing its northeastern part and the Himalayan and Pakistan borders so far. But it has finally realized also important to develop a maritime outlook. In other words, India has been discovering the importance of being a elusive force and the maritime security for roughly the last 3 or 4 decades, which implies the recovery of its malady of sea blindness So the melody that worded by retired Admiral of Indian Navy, Arun Prakash. Of course, the United States contributes to India's maritime orientation. But when we say the maritime orientation, I think we should emphasize China before the United States. The Chinese factor has been motivating India's policies or strategies and strategy orientations recently. And the Indian-Chinese rivalry is no longer occurred only in Himalayan borders, but the Chinese expansion in the Indian Ocean, actually in India's backyard, has also been a trigger for India to get rid of that, its well-known sea blindness. So the United States always thinks only of its own interests. And the United States orientation towards India, I think, is also triggered by Chinese factor, so which threatens the United States' hegemon position. And therefore, the intense contribution of the United States to India cannot be denied or ignored. It's okay. But it's also for this reason that although the United States tried to bring India to an alliance line, it tries not to care much about India's anti-alliance situation. Because I believe that the United States has a great need for an India card and will definitely want to use it when the day comes. However, I would like to underline an important nuance here. Both countries concern confluence in the China factor, but the United States has a global focus, while India has a mostly regional focus. And India's China factor and the United States proximity may briefly be stated as that, like, the more China pushes India to the United States, the more India will close to the United States. So I'm just briefly summarizing as that, but borrowing Mr. Gurpreet Khurana's phrase, Indo-Pacific was always about China. Yes, but let's not cross the red line. So what I'm saying, I think that India can only form an alliance when it comes to the question of survival. I deeply believe that. I certainly believe that. Or the other words, India will never say a yes to a formal alliance as long as it's not a matter of life and death as a sole exception. So I think the United States also thinks or believed or saw this reality, and its approach to India is not with the understanding of classical Asia-Pacific alliance system, but with how it's doing that, with bilateral special interests, encouragement, and bilateral special relations with India, and also a new version of its Asian politics within the framework of the Quad nations, Quad formation of the Indo-Pacific strategy. So as you know, we mostly see India together with Russia as the country that voices multipolarity. So what I mean is that India's maritime orientation, opposition to alliance, and today's strategic approach is carried out on the basis of strategic partnership, which is a popular model in today's international relations. So India is doing this by constructing hierarchical strategic partnerships, hierarchical, different from other countries. So that is equal treatment in accordance with the profit loss or time situation assessment. Actually, what I directly mean is that I think it wouldn't be very healthy to reduce India's maritime orientation and anti-alliance, or more generally, today's policy or strategy making to United States, the US proximity. And the last thing I want to say for this question for now, frankly, I don't think India trusts the United States. And I do not think India would truly want to be an ally with the United States, or I should say, to be in any alliance system. So we can count many reasons for that, but the most effective one is historical background, India's historical background, or its traditional habits, which are well known, I believe. So that is why, even if non-alignment sounds so old-fashioned, we can say, or according to my observations, it's still much more effective background tool, I think, of Indian policy or strategy orientation. But at the same time, it desperately needs many conjunctural revisions. And that is why in my book, I coined the concept, so very fresh concept, conjunctural non-alignment for India's current foreign policy posture, and that functions as a kind of risk control strategy that allows equal status and multi-oriented strategic partnerships, including China as well. So as well as that guarantees it safeguarding its independence against alliance formations and accordingly its own room to maneuver in world politics. So when I translated it in English, I hope one day, very soon I hope, so I think, I seriously believe this concept is so much suitable for India, that conjunctural non-alignment for India's not just 21st century Indian foreign policy, any century's Indian foreign policy, I think.
The Indo-Pacific region has dimensions other than geopolitics, such as trade, blue economy, and climate change. Do you think these other aspects receive as much attention as geopolitics? And how do India or even the United States expand their engagements beyond the axis of the China factor?
Absolutely not. Surely you have a point there. Indo-Pacific has many other dimensions. But the point is here, it's fundamentally a geopolitical construct or designation that mainly aims to control the China factor, so the rise of China. That is its, let me say, its raw material is geopolitics. The idea of the Indo-Pacific, which is designed as a super region, so where the super regions still remain important, prioritizes maritime security on behalf of developing governance arrangement to manage the freedom of movement or trade flows over the slopes, so sea lines of communication. Actually, the motivation of Indo-Pacific region is related to, in strategic language is both geoeconomic and geopolitic. So the geoeconomic dynamic is related to the energy flows and general volume of trade, particularly the protection of slopes in Indian and Pacific Oceans. But geopolitics at times involves geoeconomics when it comes to the question of how easily or difficult a state might find it to access resources, especially in the energy field. So slopes, sea lines of communication, are a question of geopolitics, but also of geoeconomics. So on the other hand, it's true that there have been many criticisms about, Indo-Pacific covers too large area, ignores institutional mechanisms, and downplays economic cooperation and priorities imperative of managing threats to maritime security. But the reality is it has geopolitically been embraced by the states. So we can't deny that, we can't ignore that. And it's seriously embraced by most of the states, even European states, whose interests are compatible with this idea in a geopolitical manner, but in a geopolitical manner. So I think the absence of any mechanism that can solve the problems and insecurity in the region leaves the priority of balancing the stability of the region with its own national interests to the responsibility of each state. So with such understanding, we may say rescaling from the Asia to the Indo-Pacific implies any functional purpose for the regional governance. And therefore, the Indo-Pacific region is seen not only as a spatial extension of Asia-Pacific, but also as an entirely new conceptualization of who constitutes the region or what issues are driving the force in this formation of the regional orders. So, as a geopolitically speaking, three major geopolitical changes that formed the United States in China and India strategic triangle have first led to be created the Indo-Pacific narrative, I think. It's a reality. Then they come together the Quad countries. And as you know, a strategic triangle exists when three major powers are sufficiently important to each other, that a change in any of them or the change in relationship between any two of them significantly affects the interests of the third. And in this context, the rise of China and India and a relative decline in the United States hegemonic power have ushered in a geopolitical shift in Asia, so exerting an influence on both regionally and globally. And in this sense, the Indo-Pacific region is closely related to the issue of how to manage the change in specific to the United States, China, and India, which emerge as a strategic triangle. And the security relations, I deeply believe, of these countries, which are the big Indo-Pacific three, will shape or shake both regional and global order. So geopolitically speaking, again, the crux of this strategic triangle is the systemic rivalry between the United States and China. But why India and China have often found themselves in a regional rivalry over the zone of strategic influence or the superiority in geopolitical space. So I may have a pessimistic view here, or I should say I'm actually very realistic on this one. But what is exactly Indo-Pacific region? The Asia-Pacific mentality has been recasted by the Quad nations, by mostly the United States. And in this context, as I previously mentioned, the Indo-Pacific emphasis, the special importance of the Indian Ocean. So where India naturally has a geopolitical advantage, and which signifies an India card for the United States against China. Admittedly, as a geopolitical construct, the Indo-Pacific is literally based on the balancing of the rise of China by promoting and prioritizing India's regional power projection in the wider Indo-Pacific region. That's the crux. So, in my opinion, for a foreseeable future, India and the United States, and also others, will likely concrete on balancing the rise of China and managing and hedging the new regional and global order or reorder in parallel with the China factor. So in a word, I do believe that the Indo-Pacific region will only be shaped on the axis of geopolitical realities until it's done, whereas the other dimensions will be of secondary importance in practices or intents, even if while they will rhetorically keep being voiced. So that is why in my book I treated realism and its bedfellow geopolitics as an overwhelming international relations theory for the subject, even if diversifying from it into constructivism.
Dr. Çağla Bayram, thank you for your time and for speaking to the Kootneeti.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this interview. You can tell us what you think in the comment section below, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter, the details of which are on your screen. Thanks for watching.